It began on a Thursday night, when the rain came down hard enough to erase footprints and memory alike. Eleanor Price was last seen leaving her house just after 8, her car headlights cutting through the fog that hung low over the fields. To her neighbors, it was nothing unusual. She often drove to the next town for work or errands. But by morning, the silence around her home felt heavy. Her phone rang unanswered. Her husband said she'd gone to clear her head. The police filed a report. Yet something about the way she vanished, no signs of struggle, no note, no trace, suggested a story that refused to stay buried. Detective Laura Keene's first impression was simple. Nothing about the scene made sense. The car was gone, but Eleanor's purse, keys, and phone charger remained. Tom insisted she often left impulsively, that she'd done so before, yet the tension in his voice betrayed him. Laura noted every detail. The mud on his boots, the faint scent of alcohol, the way his eyes shifted when she mentioned the time of night. Rain washed the front steps clean, that a single shoe print lingered on the porch, smaller than Tom's, leading away from the house and into the darkness. It wasn't proof, but it was the first quiet whisper that something here was very wrong. Outside, Detective Marcus Bell surveyed the property line. He'd been through hundreds of missing persons calls. The pattern was usually predictable. Arguments, isolation, a decision to leave. But this one felt staged. The tire tracks in the mud ran too straight, too deliberate, leading directly toward the road and then fading abruptly. As he crouched to photograph the prints, he noticed something glinting beneath a layer of wet leaves. A broken piece of jewelry, a silver charm shaped like a bird. Later, Amy would confirm it belonged to Eleanor. For Belle, it marked the moment when coincidence became a question. Amy Holt arrived late that morning, trembling as she stepped past the police tape. She told officers Eleanor had called her 2 nights before, saying she felt watched. Laura listened, asking calm, measured questions. Amy's words spilled out. The parked car outside Eleanor's house, the muffled voices over the phone, the fear in her tone. For the first time, the case turned from disappearance to potential threat. Laura felt the familiar tightening in her chest, the same instinct that had once saved her in another case, years ago, when she'd trusted her gut over procedure. By dusk, the search had expanded across the neighboring woods. Volunteers moved through the underbrush with flashlights, calling Eleanor's name. The beam of a helicopter swept over the treetops as radio chatter filled the static air. Laura watched from the roadside, her hands in her coat pockets, expression unreadable. In every disappearance, there's a moment when the story shifts, when hope begins to dissolve into something colder. For her, that moment had already come. Somewhere in the silence of those woods, the truth was waiting. And it was not the one anyone wanted to find. 2 days after Eleanor's disappearance, the investigation shifted from routine procedure to quiet alarm. Her car was found abandoned on a service road, 6 miles north, doors locked, keys inside, and no signs of struggle. Laura Keene stood beside it, scanning the empty surroundings as the mist rolled in from the nearby hills. Inside the vehicle, a faint smear of mud traced across the passenger seat, and on the dashboard, a folded receipt time-stamped an hour after she was last seen. Someone else had been with her that night. The question was no longer where Eleanor went, but who wanted her to vanish without a trace. Back at the precinct, the evidence board filled with maps, photos, and notes. Laura moved pins across a county layout, tracing routes Eleanor might have taken. Tom's timeline of that night didn't hold. He claimed he fell asleep around 9, yet his phone records showed movement near the service road close to midnight. When confronted, he said he was searching for her, worried she hadn't returned. But his voice cracked, not with grief, but fear. Behind closed doors, Laura began to sense the quiet resistance of her own department. Chief Bauer's tone shifted whenever the case came up, steering her away from pursuing the husband too closely. Amy came to the station the next morning, carrying a small box of Eleanor's things. Trinkets, photographs, a spare phone charger. She never went anywhere without her phone. she told Laura, voice shaking. When Laura asked if Eleanor ever mentioned Tom's behavior, Amy hesitated. Then she admitted that Eleanor had planned to leave him, quietly. After she found messages on his phone to another woman, the revelation shifted everything. The missing woman was preparing to escape, and someone may have known. Outside, rain began again, tapping against the windows like a clock counting down. Marcus reviewed the car's GPS data and found something unexpected. A detour made at 9:47 p.m., turning off the main road toward a closed construction site. Security cameras from a nearby store captured headlights matching Eleanor's car at that exact time, but the footage also showed a second vehicle following closely behind. Laura paused the video again and again, watching the blurred outline of that second car. It was impossible to make out details, yet her instincts whispered the same name over and over: Tom Price. That evening, Laura drove back to the service road alone. The rain had stopped, and the woods were silent, except for the low hum of cicadas. She stood beside Eleanor's car and looked out over the empty fields. Somewhere beyond that horizon lay the truth, fractured, hidden, and dangerous. Her phone buzzed with a text from Chief Bauer. "Stand down for now." The husband's been cleared, but she knew better. In her gut, she felt the invisible line tightening, pulling her towards something she couldn't yet see, but would soon be forced to confront. By the start of the third week, the story surrounding Eleanor Price had begun to fracture. A technician from digital forensics called Laura to review something unusual. A second phone registered to Eleanor's name. The device had been inactive for months, until the night she disappeared. Its last signal pinged from the edge of the same construction site captured on surveillance. Laura stared at the screen, piecing together what that meant. It wasn't just a missing person case anymore. Eleanor had been living a double life, and someone had gone to great lengths to erase it. Amy met Laura that afternoon in a small roadside cafe. She hesitated before speaking, hands trembling around her coffee cup. "Eleanor said someone from the police was helping her," she whispered. She didn't say who. Laura's pulse quickened. Inside the department, only a few had access to Eleanor's case file, and even fewer could manipulate evidence. As Amy spoke, Laura's mind reeled through names. Who among her colleagues might have known Eleanor, or wanted her silenced? For the first time, the investigation began to point inward. Marcus Bell began reviewing personnel reports. After hours, he found internal memos signed by Chief Bauer, approving unauthorized overtime for an unnamed detective. On the same nights Eleanor filed harassment complaints 2 months earlier. The reports had been quietly deleted from the system but recovered through a forensic trace. As Marcus printed the files, he hesitated. Loyalty to his superior had been unshakable for years, yet the evidence was undeniable. The corruption he'd sworn to fight was suddenly staring back from within his own badge. Laura met Marcus in the evidence lab after hours. They spoke in hushed voices, the hum of refrigeration units masking their words. He showed her the deleted memos. Her face hardened as she read. "Bauer's protecting someone," she said finally. "Someone who had contact with Eleanor." Marcus nodded. The silence between them carried the weight of shared risk. For Laura, the path forward was clear. She'd have to confront her own department, even if it meant losing everything she'd built. Later that night, Laura sat in her car outside the station, the rain returning in sheets. She replayed Eleanor's voicemail again and again. A brief, trembling message left days before she vanished. "If anything happens to me, tell Amy." It was someone in uniform. Her breath caught as she realized the magnitude of what that meant. The enemy wasn't outside the investigation. It was inside it, and now, every choice she made would determine not just justice for Eleanor, but whether she herself would survive what came next. The morning after the voicemail discovery, Laura walked into the station to find her access revoked. Her credentials no longer opened the evidence archive. When she confronted Chief Bauer, he avoided her gaze, mumbling something about procedural clearance. But she could see it in his eyes. Fear, not authority. Files were missing from Eleanor's case, call logs, GPS data, even the secondary phone records. Someone inside the department had wiped them clean. Laura knew she was being watched, her every move measured. Yet in that silence, she made a decision. She would no longer play by their rules. That afternoon, Marcus found Laura outside the station, sitting on a bench beneath an overcast sky. "They're closing it down," he said quietly. "The case is being transferred." Laura didn't answer. She just looked at him. The one person she still believed might stand with her. "If we stop now, she disappears again," she said. He hesitated, torn between the uniform he served and the truth he owed. Finally, he nodded. That moment bound them, not as officers, but as people risking everything for a woman neither could save. That evening, Laura drove to the construction site again. She parked near the caution fence, rain threatening overhead, and stepped into the mud. In the beam of her flashlight, she saw it, a scrap of fabric half buried near the base of a drainage ditch. Kneeling, she brushed away the dirt. It was a torn section of clothing, faint traces of blood still visible. Her breath caught as she realized this was no longer about disappearance. This was evidence of violence. Before she could photograph it, the sound of a car engine echoed in the distance. Someone else was there. She turned toward the sound, headlights cutting through fog, tires splashing mud. The vehicle stopped 20 yards away. For a moment, silence. Then, a door creaked open. Laura raised her light, heart pounding. It was Chief Bauer. "You shouldn't be here," he said, his voice trembling beneath forced calm. She stared at him, realizing the truth was closer than ever. "You knew," she whispered. "You knew she was in danger." His jaw tightened, and for an instant the mask slipped. Not anger, but shame. Before Laura could speak again, he turned and disappeared into the dark. Back at her apartment, Laura spread out every remaining piece of evidence across the kitchen table. Photographs, receipts, transcripts. And now, the fragment of fabric sealed in a plastic bag. Her hands trembled. The voicemail echoed again in her mind. Someone in uniform. She finally saw it clearly. Eleanor hadn't vanished because she ran. She was silenced because she spoke. The system meant to protect her had erased her instead. As lightning flashed through the window, Laura knew what came next. She would go public and expose them all. Laura called Tom Price into the station under the guise of new developments. He arrived looking hollow, eyes sunken, hands shaking as he lit a cigarette outside before entering. The interrogation room felt smaller than usual, the air thick with tension. Laura sat across from him, calm and steady, the recorder's red light glowing between them. "Tell me about that night," she began. At first, he repeated what he'd always said. She left. She needed time. But as minutes passed, cracks formed. His words faltered. His eyes darted to the mirror, searching for someone who wasn't there. The silence that followed carried the weight of everything he'd tried to bury. Minutes turned into hours. Tom's story began to unravel. He admitted following Eleanor that night. Said he only wanted to talk, to make her come home. His voice broke when he described her panic, the way she stepped backward near the car, slipping on the wet road. "I didn't mean for her to fall," he whispered. But there was more. Laura pressed gently, asking what happened after. His silence spoke louder than words. He stared at the table, knuckles white, then finally looked up. "I called someone," he said. "Someone who told me what to do next." Marcus stepped into the observation room, shutting the blinds as Tom's words echoed in his head. "I called someone." He turned toward Laura, voice low. "You think it was Bauer?" Laura didn't answer. She played the recording back, the sound of Tom's confession filling the silence. Outside, storm clouds gathered over the town, the first drops tapping the windows. They both knew what this meant. The department wasn't just compromised, it was complicit. And with the evidence Laura had gathered, their next move would determine whether justice survived the night. Tom's formal statement was brief and incomplete, but it was enough to fracture the illusion. He claimed Chief Bauer had arrived at the scene after Eleanor's fall and took care of it. No body, no report. Only silence bought with fear. Laura knew the implications. This wasn't negligence. It was conspiracy. When she presented the statement to Bauer the next morning, his denial was immediate, but his voice cracked mid-sentence. "You don't understand what you're playing with," he said. She met his gaze and replied, "No, Chief, you don't understand what you've buried." That night, Laura drove to the lake outside town. The same one Eleanor once photographed in her social media posts. The surface shimmered beneath the moonlight, calm and deceptive. She thought of Tom's words, of Bauer's warnings, and of Eleanor's voice on the voicemail. Somewhere beneath that reflection lay the truth. Perhaps even the body. The camera inside Laura's mind began to capture it all, not as evidence, but as memory. She whispered softly into the night, "I'll finish what you started." The breeze shifted, carrying the faint echo of a woman's laughter, or maybe just the wind moving through the reeds. By dawn, Laura had made her choice. The department's silence had become its own confession. She copied every file, Tom's statement, the hidden memos, the voicemail, onto a single encrypted drive. Her hands trembled as she pressed send, attaching it all to a message addressed to 3 national outlets. She didn't wait to see if it went through. Within hours, phones began ringing across the precinct, reporters circling like storm clouds. Chief Bauer's voice boomed behind closed doors, demanding answers he no longer controlled. For Laura, the risk was no longer professional. It was survival. By noon, the media had the story. News vans crowded the front of the station, microphones waiting, lights glaring against gray skies. Laura watched from across the street, unseen, as the world began to learn the truth. On every screen, Eleanor's photograph appeared, smiling, alive, beside headlines about missing evidence and police misconduct. Marcus called her from a payphone. "They're coming for you," he said quietly. "Pack a bag." But she didn't move. For the first time since the investigation began, she felt still, not safe, but certain. Chief Bauer's press statement aired that evening. He denied everything, calling the accusations fabrications, claiming the investigation was handled properly. But as he spoke, an email surfaced, one of the deleted memos Laura and Marcus had recovered. His signature appeared beside a timestamp matching the night Eleanor vanished. The evidence spread faster than rumor. Within hours, state investigators arrived. Bauer's face, once steady and untouchable, crumbled before the cameras. Laura watched the broadcast from a diner booth, the hum of conversation fading around her. She didn't smile. There was no victory in truth, only consequence. Marcus was suspended without warning 2 days later. His clearance revoked, his loyalty questioned. He met Laura in a park at dusk, both aware that every word might be recorded. "I'll bury this if we stop now," he said. Laura nodded. "Then we don't stop." For a moment, neither spoke. The air was heavy with the sound of insects and distant traffic. What began as a search for a missing woman had become an unmasking of an entire system. The truth was out, but the cost was only beginning to show. Late that night, Laura returned to the lake. The water was calm again, reflecting the pale light of a crescent moon. She left her phone on the hood of her car and stepped closer to the shoreline. Somewhere beneath that surface, Eleanor's story had ended, but its echo had reshaped everything above it. The department would fall. The names would change, but the silence she broke would never return. She whispered a quiet apology to the woman she couldn't save. The wind shifted, carrying the scent of rain and the faint shimmer of freedom. Weeks passed. The town grew quiet again, though the silence no longer felt peaceful. The investigation had become a national scandal. Arrests, resignations, and a community fractured by disbelief. Yet Eleanor Price remained missing. Her story existed only in headlines, court filings, and the whispered guilt of those who once ignored her fear. Laura Keene sat alone in her now empty office, boxes stacked around her, badge turned in. She replayed Eleanor's voicemail one last time, the words faint beneath static. Someone in uniform. It was no longer a warning. It was a prophecy fulfilled. Marcus met Laura one final time before leaving town. They stood in the parking lot outside the diner where everything had started. He told her he'd taken a new job. Somewhere far away, somewhere quiet. "They'll come after you again," he said. She nodded. "They already have." For a long moment, neither spoke. The world around them kept moving. Cars, voices, the sound of rain beginning to fall. It wasn't victory they shared, but survival. And sometimes that had to be enough. Months later, a fisherman discovered fragments of a vehicle at the bottom of the lake. Twisted metal. License plate barely legible. Forensic testing confirmed it belonged to Eleanor Price. Inside, waterlogged remnants of her journal survived, pages clinging together like skin. Among the fragments was one line written in smeared ink. "If they silence me, tell them I tried." The case was officially closed, but no one called it justice. Truth had surfaced, but it hadn't healed anything. It had only revealed the depth of what everyone already knew. In the final broadcast of the documentary, the recovered audio plays. Eleanor's laughter from an old home video. Amy's voice overlays softly. She was kind. She believed people were better than they were. As the image fades, Laura's voice returns, steady yet distant. "We can solve cases. We can name the guilty, but we can't bring back what was taken. The truth only changes what's left behind." The screen fills with images of the town. Streets, fields, faces, ordinary again, but marked forever by what they tried to forget. At the lake's edge, long after cameras stopped rolling, Laura returned once more. She placed Eleanor's recovered journal, sealed and restored, inside a small wooden box and lowered it gently into the water. The ripples widened, then vanished into reflection. "You were heard," she whispered. In the distance, the horizon glowed faintly with dawn. The investigation was over, but the story would live on. A testament to one woman's voice, and the price of listening too late.